All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Just a reminder, if you do enjoy this content, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. So, we are going to be doing an in-depth review of a book I've been meaning to do an in-depth review for like a year now. It is the G.I. Joe role-playing game Intercontinental Adventures Factions and Actions Volume 2. And if that sounds like a mouthful, wait till we talk about the book. Now, as a quick reminder, this is an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in depth. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they do well, the things I think they need to do better. But that takes a long time to do. Generally over an hour, sometimes 2 to 3 hours, depending how big the book is. And not everybody wants to sit through an hour-long video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So, at the beginning of every one of these videos, I have a should you buy it section. And I divide potential buyers into one of 3 groups. The first group is a group that I call players. Players are people that are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily going to be sitting at a table and playing a single player character. Obviously, they're going to have different wants and needs than the other groups. The second group is a group that I call GMs. GMs are people that are going to be sitting at a table and primarily, not exclusively, but primarily are going to be running the games. They're going to be designing adventures. They're going to be creating the worlds, all that fun stuff that GMs get to do. Obviously, they have different wants and needs than players. The third group is an often overlooked group that I call the Lorehounds. Lorehounds may never actually sit at a table, but they really like the lore, the world, all of the cool stuff that describes how the world works and everything like that. And obviously, they're going to have different wants and needs as the other 2 groups. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. And I just realized I do not have enough water for this. There we go. Water. All right, the first group. Should players buy this book? So, when I'm doing these in-depth reviews, I like to kind of separate books into kind of like 2 or 3 different groups. You have your core books. These are the books that you need to be able to play the game. You have your rules expansions, which are exactly that. They just add more rules, add more character options, whatever, to the game. And then you have what I refer to as campaign settings. And those generally do have new rules and new options, but they're all based around a specific theme. And a lot of times the new rules or options are geared toward playing a very specific kind of game. And if you don't use the things that are described in the campaign setting, then a lot of the abilities are not going to be very useful for you. This particular book is kind of halfway in between a rules expansion and a campaign setting. And the reason that I say that, the basis of this book is technically a campaign setting, in the idea that the entirety of this book is about kind of international campaigns. The entire 5th chapter of the book is all about, these are different adventures you can have on every single continent. And these are little the things that you can do there. They have different factions and things like that from all over the world. This is designed to take your G.I. Joe game international. That being said, unlike something like the Time Force book for Power Rangers, where if you're not going through time, like quite a few of the perks and other things in there are not going to be very useful for you, being international from a mechanical standpoint really doesn't change that much. Most of the new options that you have for characters, which is what most players are going to be interested in, are going to be useful in any kind of campaign that you run. Um, the big difference is going to be each one of the different kind of groups that they introduce in this are going to have a very, very specific theme. That if you don't want your character to kind of have that theme, then most of the abilities are probably not going to be that useful for you. Like the first group that's introduced is the Arashikage, which is the ninjas. And there's actually 3 different flavors of factions in there, but they're all ninja themed. They're all martial arts focused. The new focus, the new actual commando focus in there is very ninja-esque. If you want to create a ninja character, taking the new silent weapons expert focus will make it significantly easier. It doesn't mean you can't make a ninja with like the core book stuff, but this is specifically designed around that. The Dreadnoks are a biker gang. That's what they are. They're also anti-G.I. Joe. So in a Cobra campaign, you might do the Dreadnoks. The Oktober Guard is another anti-G.I. Joe group of Russians. I mean, say whatever you want about it's Russians. Like, as much as in our current climate, Russians are the bad guys for a number of different reasons that you may or may not agree with. If we go back to when G.I. Joe was being written and everything, Russians were the bad guys for a completely different reason. And so the Oktober Guard were kind of birthed from that version of communist Russia. And so, yeah, so you're, if you want to belong to a biker gang, the Dreadnoks are yours. They also have a lot of vehicle stuff in there. Oktober Guard actually has a lot of more, like, in addition to being Russian themed, it's also very, like, Siberian themed. So they have a large emphasis on vehicles and stuff in there. And then the last chapter actually has guidelines for creating your own mercenary groups, your own international organizations, and the things like that. So there's a lot of stuff in this book. And I forgot to look up the cost. There we go. Just need my costs here so I can make my recommendations. So yeah, going back to this. The book itself is not particularly long. I believe it's just a little bit over like 100 what? Yeah, a little over 130 pages. So it's not a massive book. It's not this like 300-page monster it's going to tell you. And it's not supposed to be. But every one of the pages is really, really kind of densely packed with a lot of different things. Like I said, in this book itself, there are 2 new foci. There is a new commander focus called the Silent Weapons Expert. And then there's also a new technician focus called the Engineer Troop. There's a bunch of new factions. There's probably just the ones that are actually explained in here. There are, I think, 6 new factions in here. And then they also have basically a style guide for creating your own factions. And that's, I've mentioned before, like, if you look at what, of the 3 Essence 20 systems, what each one does really, really well, Power Rangers, their roles and their perks are the things that they do well. And that's the thing that they really, really focus on. So the most interesting perks and the roles that are going to feel the most unique are going to be Power Rangers. For Transformers, a lot of that is a combination of perks and then their origins, because of that Transformer aspect. That's where you get your Transformer form. So a lot of times, anytime you're looking at Transformer books, they're going to be giving you new origins and new perks that interact with those origins in interesting ways. For G.I. Joe, they kind of do 3 different things. as far as Essence 20 is concerned. One, their equipment upgrades are second to none. They have all the cool toys. And so there's tons of that, and there's tons of new equipments and upgrades throughout this book. Two, vehicles are nonsense levels of crazy in G.I. Joe. Like in Transformers, vehicles are, your character is a vehicle. There are some vehicles in Transformers, but they are a vehicle in and of themselves. For Power Rangers, your vehicles are Zords. For G.I. Joe, and we saw this in my last G.I. Joe in-depth review, it's all about the vehicles. There's so many. And then the third thing that G.I. Joe does that really no other Essence 20 system does nearly as much is factions. There are 47 bajillion factions. And just like how Finster's Monstermatic was the book that basically teaches you how to build your own monsters, this is the book that teaches you how to build your own factions. So with that, for players, the book itself, normally when I do this stuff, I do it early enough that you can pick up the hardcover, and then you get the PDF for free. I'm pretty sure that's over, but they still have that language on the page for it. So I'm gonna say you can't get the PDF for free anymore, but if you accidentally do, be happy with it. But it's $45 for the physical version, $30 for just the PDF. Would I recommend this to players for $45? Yeah, as long as something in here interests you. Like if you want more ninja style weapons, you're going to be super, super happy. If you want some new vehicle options, you're probably going to be really, really happy. And then for the Oktober Guard, they have new vehicles, they have new equipment, perks, and all these other things. Like, there's a lot of different stuff in here that I can't really narrow it down to, oh, if you want to play Ninja, get this book. Well, yes, but there's also a lot of other things. And depending on how kind of liberal you want to be with your character, you might use some of the Dreadnought vehicles, or you might use, like, they have new vehicle combat options in the Dreadnoks thing. So if you want to be a more vehicle-focused character, even if you're going to be a G.I. Joe, there's tons of stuff in here that's going to be very useful for you. So yeah, for $45, 100%, I think this is a great, great deal. If you're not into physical books in general, the PDF is just as good at the $30. Or technically, it's even better because it's $15 less, and you don't have to pay shipping, which is really nice. So yeah, moving on. The second group. Should GMs buy this book? Like I said, this is halfway, like I said in my other thing where I'm recommending to players, this is effectively halfway between a campaign setting and a rules expansion. And from a GM perspective, for the most part, rules expansions tend to favor players because they just give them a bunch of new toys to play with, and the GMs basically have to kind of deal with it. Campaign settings tend to favor GMs because in addition to having a few new character options, a lot of times they'll have a lot more options for the GM to be able to run games in that campaign setting. Sometimes they'll introduce new rules. A lot of times they will have new monster stat blocks. Because this is kind of a bridge between both, there's a lot of stuff in here for a GM to have a lot of fun with. The Arashikage chapter, not only does it have the Arashikage, which is, your standard kind of ninja group, there's also a specific, and the Arashikage specifically, they are kind of an allied group with G.I. Joe. The Arashikage themselves are not Joes, but they have a favorable relationship with the Joes. Ninja Force, on the other hand, is a kind of sub-faction within the Joes. And then there's also the Red Ninja faction, which is basically ninjas that don't like the Joes. So just in that, you have 3 different factions that are useful, whether you're running a G.I. Joe campaign or a Cobra campaign or a kind of unaligned campaign where you're like a mercenary company. Sometimes works with the Joes, sometimes works with Cobra. Depends on who has the best money at the time. So in addition to having these new factions that really allow you to tell some interesting stories, it helps if I go to the right page. They also have a bunch of new contacts. Every single group has a bunch of new contacts that can be used with the contact system built into Essence 20, which is still probably my favorite kind of NPC aid system that exists in tabletop RPGs. Like it's simple enough to be able to template it out and use it for anything that you want, but it's complex enough that your players are going to feel rewarded for using these contacts and basically for becoming invested in the NPCs that you put in here. So in addition to stuff like that, this thing is just chock full of not just lore, but every single chapter has at the end, like for chapter 2 on the Arashikage, the last subsection is Arashikage in your campaign. And it gives you kind of tips and tricks on how to kind of introduce this faction. Even if you have no players that are going to be a part of this faction, you could still introduce them and have some really interesting, fun stories. And the other thing that's kind of unique about G.I. Joe compared to the other Essence 20 TTRPGs is while, yes, you can change your faction in the other TTRPGs, and the crossover book kind of gives you rules on how to do that. G.I. Joe is really written around the idea that your Joes can and probably will change factions throughout your campaign. And so by introducing the Arashikage or Ninja Force into your campaign, one of your player characters might start to realize that they really identify with the Arashikage, or they really want to be a part of Ninja Force. And that might inspire them to change their faction. In the same way, adding Dreadnoks to your campaign, even if it's a G.I. Joe thing, they may realize that, wow, if we're going to be fighting this biker gang, my character really wants to be much more kind of attuned with vehicles and stuff like that. So in the first Factions in Action book, they actually had at least one faction that was G.I. Joe centric that was much more vehicle focused. And then again, a bunch of different perks and things that they can use to kind of customize their character to be more vehicle focused. And the same is true about the Oktober Guard. Just introducing the Oktober Guard might make the characters go, hey, if this is the world that we're going to be dealing with, I may want to start changing how my character plays. Which is something that I think a lot of people really don't bring up about long-term campaigns. Like I am currently running 3 long-term campaigns, and I ended a 5.5-year long campaign about 2 years ago. And something that I think a lot of people kind of undervalue is you may have like a plan for how you're going to level up your character when you first build them, but as you play the character more, things change. And you start realizing, you know what, instead of doing this, maybe I'm going to multi-class into this because it makes the most sense for my character. Like I have one of my players plays a blood hunter. And for most of the campaign, they were perfectly fine just being a blood hunter. But they had another character in the party that was very much kind of focused on the Dark Lady, which is my goddess of death in my custom campaign setting. And their characters started really identifying with a lot of the tenets of the faith, and so they started multi-classing into Paladin because it made sense for their character. So getting back to this from a GM perspective, by adding these new weapon types, new weapon upgrades, new battle dress upgrades, vehicles, things like that. As you introduce these new factions to your campaign, you will probably see, if it's a long-term campaign, you will probably see your characters start making different choices for their character, and it's going to change their level up options, and this just gives you tons of stuff. The other thing that is really, really useful about this book is the Chapter 5, A World of Adventure. Has two different things. One, it has a bunch of suggestions about how to run international campaigns, what to do in the different continents. We'll go more into that when we do the in-depth portion of this. But in addition to that, it has guidelines for creating your own factions. So if your players are playing through and, maybe they do, you introduce the Dreadnoks, they're like, you know what? I want to be part of a biker gang kind of thing, but I want to be part of a G.I. Joe biker gang, and I don't like, I can't remember the one from the first Factions in Action book. But I don't want to be a part of that faction. Well, then you can create your own mercenary faction, or you can create your own international crime syndicate, or things like that. And that character can join that faction. And it really does break down very, very well. This is how factions work. Just in Essence 20 in general, they're very specifically tailoring this to G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe is the only Essence 20 game currently where you're kind of expected to change your faction every so often. For both Power Rangers and Transformers, like, the unique aspects of being a Power Ranger is built into your faction. Like, its Morphin Time is part of your faction perks. So changing from a Power Ranger to something else is a little bit awkward. It's still possible, like you could become a Silver Guardian or something like that in Power Rangers, but it's not quite as expected as it is in G.I. Joe. So in this book, it is much more geared towards, this is how you design G.I. Joe factions, but there's still a lot of information here that if you want to design your own factions, if you want to start making a kind of generalized Essence 20 system, or generic Essence 20 system, as opposed to Power Rangers, G.I. Joe, or Transformers, this is another puzzle piece you need. Again, Finster's Guide to Monsters, or whatever it is, Monstermatic, there we go. That teaches you how to build threats. This teaches you how to create factions. And the only thing that we don't really have is kind of a guide on how to create your own, like, equipment and stuff like that. But at this point, there are so many different weapons that have been introduced and weapon upgrades and all these other things. At this point, I don't think they really need to tell us how to design equipment. They have given us such a massive, massive list of equipment that you really don't need a guide on, well, these are the guidelines we do when we're introducing new equipment. You can template it out from what they have. So this is a really, really kind of essential book, I think, for Essence 20 GMs in general, if you want to really get into the faction system, or if you want to kind of bare bones down the Essence 20 system and kind of create your own game using Essence 20. This is an essential book. So yeah, do I recommend GMs get this? Absolutely. $45 is a steal for the amount of really useful stuff. And again, there's other stuff in here too, like tons and tons of threats and things like that, which are always useful for GMs. But I think, yeah, $45 for just how much very, very useful stuff is in here. It's a steal. And then obviously, if it's good for $45 plus shipping, go for $30. And again, there's lots of ways to get the physical book without having to pay shipping, and probably without having to pay $45. Go to your friendly local game store. They may have sales that you can do, or bare minimum, you can just get the book without paying shipping and support your friendly local game store, which is really important. So, yeah, moving on. The third group. Should Lorehounds buy this book? If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. Something that Essence 20 does better than literally any other RPG developer in the game right now is they are great about ensuring every single book is lore first. They always, always, always want to ensure that everything they're doing is based on lore, and every new item they introduce, every new class, every new influence, origin, whatever, has a long history in these. I mean, GI Joe and Transformers have been around since the 80s. And they have had television shows. They've had multiple television shows. G.I. Joe specifically lived on in comic books for decades. And they've had multiple comic book runs with different kind of realities and things like that. Transformers is the same way, where they've had tons and tons of different TV shows. There's the movie. There's the Michael Bay movie series that doesn't have Michael Bay anymore. There's multiple different comics. This is a series. There's the old cartoons. Like, it's nuts how much lore already exists. And the people that are writing this stuff really goes hard into ensuring that the lore is respected and shows up in here. So for Lorehounds, there's tons of stuff that you can read. Like, the beginning of every single chapter in this, like chapter 2, the Arashikage. The first section, history of the Arashikage. And then they have the history of Storm Shadow. So you get an in-depth look specifically at Storm Shadow. Because depending on which comic or which TV series you're looking at, Storm Shadow is a bad guy, a good guy, both and neither, all at the same time. And so tons and tons and tons of lore of that. Same thing is true about the Dreadnoks. History of the Dreadnoks. Same thing is true about the Oktober Guard. History of the Oktober Guard. Same thing is true about Chapter 5, World of Adventure. They talk about Interpol. They talk about all the new factions. They talk about how each one of these groups interacts on a global scale. Just tons and tons of stuff. And then, again, every single threat generally has a little description of what they are and what they do. So yeah, tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of lore stuff for you to stick your teeth in if you're into G.I. Joe lore. So, recommendation as far as, do I think Lorehound should buy the physical version, which again, $45. Yeah. If you like physical books, it's great. The artwork, and that's another thing that I like to talk about for Lorehounds. I mean, artwork is great for everyone, but there's so many stories that are told through artwork. The artwork is really, really gorgeous in this. And again, some of it is obviously taken directly from comic books. A lot of it, though, seems like it was created specifically for this book, which I know Essence 20 people watch my videos. And I know some of them have mentioned that, yeah, we do. They kind of get, I don't know if it's they get a budget or they just get kind of permission of, you're going to be able to get this much kind of custom artwork, and then the rest of it is going to come from the comic books, because there's tons and tons of comic books out there, and the artwork in there is already gorgeous. I have no idea how much of the artwork in this is completely custom, but it is really, really gorgeous. So yeah, do I recommend this to Lorehounds? Absolutely. Sink your teeth into some G.I. Joe goodness. Moving on. All right, so quick recommendation recap. For players, yes, I recommend this. There's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff in here for you. Everything from new character options like new origins, new influences, new foci, but there's also a bunch of new weapons, a bunch of new just equipment options in general, new vehicles. Like, there's tons of stuff in here for you. For GMs, in addition to all that cool stuff and lore that's useful for you building campaigns, they have an entire here's how to design your own faction section in here, which is almost in and of itself worth the price of the book. Like, it's an essential part of the Essence 20 system, and they really lay it out nicely in here. So definitely a recommendation for GMs. And then for Lorehounds, again, Essence 20 puts lore in everything, and this book is no exception. There's tons of really great lore. There's great artwork in here. You will probably really, really enjoy this book. So, yeah. If you were just here for the recommendations, thank you so much for tuning in. In the comments down below, what are your thoughts on ninjas in G.I. Joe? Are you a fan? Are you not a fan? Are you more closely aligned with like the Dreadnoks or the Oktober Guard, or do you really like ninjas? let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, it is time for us to get into the in-depth review. So, as a reminder, this is going to be an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things that I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. And all of this takes a really, really long time. So every one of these in-depth reviews, I always will put timestamps in to make it easier. Feel free to jump around the timestamps, look at the things that you like, come back later. Again, most of these videos are hour and a half, 2 hours easily. Now, Google and YouTube would want me to tell you, no, sit here and watch the entire thing. Watch it 700 times. I understand that you don't have that kind of time. So use the timestamps. That's what they're there for. Find the things that interest you, and then come back for the rest later. So that being said, it is time for us to jump into this in-depth review. Chapter 1, A Global Conflict. This is kind of your standard, hey, what's this book about? But like so many other Essence 20 books, it is so much more than, hey, this is the stuff that's in the book. They put a little bit of lore in here, while also to talk about, hey, this is the stuff you're going to find in here. And they also mention that, hey, this is you know, a source book. It's not a core book, so you're going to need the core rule book. And then they also mention either having Factions in Action Volume 1 or another Essence 20 role-playing book that introduces both the contacts rules and the factions rules, because they don't explain them specifically in this book. To be perfectly honest, if you're already playing Essence 20, you probably have... They have like 3 or 4 different books where they introduce the contact system over and over again. So you probably already have one that explains the minutia of the contact system and the faction system. So, yeah, otherwise, like I said, just pick up Ferocious Fighters because it kind of goes with this as well. In addition to that, it talks about each one of the different kind of groups they focus on, the Arashikage, the Dreadnoks, and the Oktober Guards. Yeah, and then they have an entire chapter for others as far as international organizations. It's a quick chapter. It is exactly 1 page with another page that's just a full page piece of art. That's very pretty. Used a lot of pastels that I wasn't expecting. But yeah, very simple, very useful. Moving on. Chapter 2, Arashikage. So, the Arashikage, lore-wise, is basically an ancient ninja group. I believe both Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow were at one point members of the Arashikage. Storm Shadow eventually went and worked with Cobra. Snake Eyes eventually went and worked with G.I. Joe, but they both have very close ties. And depending on which comic series you're reading, I believe both of them become the head of the Arashikage at one point or another, or a pretty big part of the Arashikage. So that's what it is. It's a group of ninjas. And compared to like the 80s versions of ninjas, which were the massive cultural appropriation, like borderline racist version, the Arashikage has been fleshed out enough to where it's not like a caricature or anything like that. And they actually do have a lot of interesting lore built into it. And they specifically kind of focus on Storm Shadow in this book because we've talked about Snake Eyes a lot in other books. And then you get to the 3 new factions that are available. And in addition to each faction having a different lore reason for existing, they also have specifically different mechanics that to make them work differently. Like, specifically for the Arashikage, one of their faction perks, which is true, which is something that is useful to you no matter what role or influence or anything that you have. This is just on top of all that. One of the things that it does, it gives you, you are qualified with 1 limited melee weapon and 1 limited projectile weapon, both of which must have the martial arts trait and trained in all weapons with the martial arts trait. That's a really, really big deal because the way that equipment requisitions work in G.I. Joe is you can requisition, meaning you have to make a roll to be able to get the equipment, anything that you're trained in. So if you're an Arashikage, any weapon that has the martial arts trait you are trained in, you can requisition that. Qualified, you don't have to requisition it. You just get it. So you can have a qualified limited melee weapon that you always have access to, and then a limited projectile weapon that you always have access to. That in and of itself, because of how important weapons and equipment are in the Essence 20 system, where they do change how you play your character, that is a huge, huge deal in allowing you to create the exact character that you want to play. So that's the Arashikage, and there's a lot more to it, but that's just an example of something that makes the Arashikage unique. For Ninja Force, you get, again, you get qualified with a limited melee weapon and a limited projectile weapon that has the martial art trait. But you also, once per scene, can get an edge on any culture skill test related to ninja tactics. So as you can see, and there's a bunch of other things as well. The Ninja Force in and of itself, I believe, is a little bit more kind of stealth focused than the Arashikage, but just tons and tons of stuff. And these factions actually change how you play your character. So that in and of itself is pretty cool and fun. And then they have a new origin and a new influence. Origin is Arashikage Apprentice, which means that that's where you come from. And then for influences, you have the Arashikage Graduate. And again, both of them are interesting. Both of them allow you to play very interesting characters. Like, I don't want to go into too many examples here to not kind of give away everything in the book. But they're both very useful if you want to be a more kind of martial arts focused character. And then the new commando focus is called the Silent Weapons Expert. You're a ninja. And a lot of the things that you get as part of this focus really allow you to do some very cool things. So things like their 3rd level ability is called Two-Handed Assault. You get to choose either kind of a dual wielding focus, where making attacks with 2 weapons normally gives you a bunch of penalties. This reduces those penalties, kind of similar to like the ambidexterity feat or the 2-weapon fighting feats from 3rd edition to D&D. Just makes it easier for you to be able to make these kind of multi-attacks. Or you can focus on 2-handed silent weapons and get upshifts on that. And that's really useful. Again, a lot of G.I. Joe and a lot of SS20 in general, if you're looking at both G.I. Joe and kind of Transformers, you tend to be doing a lot more ranged attacks. And so this Silent Weapons Expert doesn't have to be a melee-based character. Like a 2-handed silent weapon could be a bow. as in bow, not like bow staff, but like bow and arrow, bow. And you could do that, or your one-handed silent weapons might be throwing daggers or the things like that. So you can still be a ranged character, but it does allow you to kind of focus and really specialize in weapons and combat styles that are a little bit more difficult to do in like the core book, and this makes you really feel kind of badass and cool. Yeah, and then the contacts that they have are all like really strong lore based contacts, and then you also, and this is something I find really fascinating, for the contacts for this chapter, you get multiple versions of Snake Eyes. You have Snake Eyes, the Silent Master, which one version of Snake Eyes eventually becomes one of the masters of the Arashikage. But then you also get Snake Eyes Don Marino, who is a different person. He's not the original Snake Eyes that we see, but he eventually took over the mantle of Snake Eyes when Snake Eyes left. So you have two different flavors of Snake Eyes that you have here. And then Storm Shadow, you actually have two different flavors of Storm Shadow in here. You have Storm Shadow the Young Master, and then Storm Shadow Independent Agent, where one of them is a part of the Arashikage and the other one is his own kind of free agent to deal with his contact. And then you also get a character named Sean Collins, who, depending on the version you're dealing with, is actually turned into one of two different characters. Kamakura, who is, I believe, Snake Eye's apprentice, and then Throwdown, who's I don't think he's associated. Yeah, he basically becomes the second Snake Eyes. So yeah, really cool, interesting things where you can kind of see like different flavors and different versions of the same characters. And then we get to the threats and vehicles, which are, again, great. Essence 20, it's real hard to make a boring Essence 20 enemy. They're just really not designed in that way. And so most of this stuff, like you have your generic like Arashikage student and Arashikage master, which are just your kind of cannon fodder characters that you throw at them. But then you also get things like Jinx and Nunchuck. And this is where things also get interesting. There is a threat stat block for Storm Shadow, G.I. Joe Ally, if you're doing a Cobra campaign. And then there's also a stat block for Storm Shadow, Cobra Agent, if you're doing a G.I. Joe campaign and you want Storm Shadow to be a bad guy. So we have 4 different versions of Storm Shadow here. We have Storm Shadow the Silent Master as a contact. We have Storm Shadow Independent Agent as a contact. We have Storm Shadow G.I. Joe Ally as a threat. And then Storm Shadow Cobra Agent also as a threat. So we have 4 different versions of Storm Shadow existing here. And each one is unique and interesting and allows you to tell very unique stories. And then the final thing they have is the lightning cycle, which is something, depending on which faction you choose, you can actually be qualified in the lightning cycle. So you basically get access to a motorcycle whenever you want. And then after that, we also have all the Arashikage equipment, which includes things like Iron Claws, which is a real thing. And it's basically a claw weapon. And then also the hobnailed boot, which is basically a weapon that doesn't take any hands because it's just a boot. So it's kind of an unarmed strike integrated weapon. And they also have a battle dress upgrade. Like, there's cool stuff. And then a bunch of cool Arashikage general perks, which is very cool, including a perk called Vibrating Palm. And if you've ever played a D&D monk, you know what Vibrating Palm is. You've studied the Vibrating Palm, a forbidden move that targets pressure points and disrupts the flow of the body's inner energy, often called chi, ki, or ki. This technique causes devastating damage to internal organs. It can even bring death long after the actual attack has occurred. And if you're starting to realize what this is the like 5-finger death strike or whatever you want to call it. It's shown up in most TTRPGs for monks. It's this ability for them to punch someone and then like a week later just will them to die. So yeah, you want to play that martial arts style character. There's lots of stuff here. Yeah, really, really like that. And then we finally get to Arashikage in your campaign. And this is just kind of like, well, this is how you introduce the Arashikage. This is kind of how they're going to interact with the G.I. Joes. This is how they're going to interact with Cobra. It's mostly information that's useful for the GM, but it also can be very useful if you want to be an actual Arashikage character as opposed to just someone that's using some of the character options in here. Because you can be like a silent weapons expert without joining the Arashikage. Or you can use the various new perks without having to join that faction or any of the factions in this book. However, if you would like to actually have an Arashikage character in the game, then this will give you a nice little guide on, well, this is how they kind of fit into the world itself. So, yeah. Moving on. Chapter 3. Dreadnoks. Dreadnoks are an evil biker gang. Like I said before, I'm actually going to look this up because it's annoying the hell out of me that I can't remember what it's called. Tiger Force, I think, is the one that I'm thinking of. Yeah, so Tiger Force is kind of the vehicle-based G.I. Joe faction. It's not exactly the same. It's not entirely vehicle focused, but it has more of a vehicle focus than most of the other factions for G.I. Joe. Dreadnoks is the bad guys that Zartan, who is... He's belonged to Cobra, I think, in certain things, but most of the time he's his own thing that's just kind of allied with Cobra. He leads the Dreadnoks, and yeah, they're a bunch of punks that like explosive things in vehicles and stuff like that. And they're really interesting. Again, they're geared around the idea of the Dreadnoks themselves. Just like the Arashikage tends to be more allied with the G.I. Joes than against them, the Dreadnoks tend to be more allied with Cobra than they are against them. However, one of the interesting things about a villainous campaign that they really emphasize well in the Decepticon Directive is well-written villains in fiction and things like that tend to be, if we're looking at the alignment grid, they tend to be evil aligned. And what evil aligned means is not that, well, I'm a bad guy, so I do bad things. No, it means they're very self-motivated. They're going to do whatever is best for themselves. And sometimes that means working with the other villains. Sometimes it means stabbing them in the back. And so politics plays a really big part. And I'm not like talking politics like I invented pants, which that joke is very, very old at this point. Because it was the 2000 election between Bush and Gore. But I'm not talking about like red versus blue states. I'm talking about, intergroup politics, people that use whisper campaigns to get what they want and stuff like that. Like, politics plays a really, really big part in a villainous campaign and with villainous organizations in general. So the fact that the Dreadnoks tend to be allied with Cobra doesn't mean that the Dreadnoks are always going to be working with Cobra. And if you're running a G.I. Joe campaign and you have a player that they want to play a Dreadnok, but they don't want to be, they want to be part of the G.I. Joes, very easily, and this happens a lot of times in in Transformers, we've seen it happen. In G.I. Joe, the comic books, we've seen it happen. Basically, there is an alliance of convenience that happens where the Dreadnoks just happen to be allied with the wants and needs of the Dreadnoks at this particular time just happen to coincide with what the Joes want and need at that particular side. And so they became allies of convenience. And so you can create a Dreadnought character that's basically on loan to the Joes because they are doing things that benefit the Dreadnoks. And it actually kind of brings up something that I talked about a long time ago. Something that became really, really popular in the 90s. And a lot of TTRPGs tried to start implementing it. Was something that started with Vampire the Masquerade, which is the idea that because your players would probably belong to different clans, different vampire clans, each clan has its own motivation and its own relationship with the masquerade. So despite the fact that you have all your player characters are part of a team and are trying to work together, each one has their own motivations, and it creates inter-party conflict when two clans have conflicting motivations about the same goal, and they want different outcomes for it. That can be something that happens here. You start off with a Dreadnought character that is, again, an ally of convenience to the Joes. They get loaned over to the Joes for a little bit, and for a few missions, things work perfectly fine. And then the Dreadnoks, like they like to do, decide that their interests are better served if the Joes are not getting everything that they want. And you can start introducing kind of inter-party conflict. Now, to do that well requires a lot of work, and the players have to be open to it. If the players aren't open to it, you probably want to just go, okay, well, if you want to play this Dreadnought character, you only get to keep playing this Dreadnought character as long as the Dreadnoks are allied. And as soon as they break off, you're going to have to play a different character. Or your character is going to have to quit the Dreadnoks and change factions. Which is another thing that can happen in the G.I. Joe RPG. So yeah, that being said, they have a new influence, Dreadnought Recruit. And then they immediately go into the threats and contacts. So the Dreadnoks, as far as the three like main factions that are introduced here, I think the Dreadnoks are the ones that are the least well defined in this book. They have the least new options, the least kind of lore and everything built into it because they have the least new options. But there's still some cool stuff. So we go through the threats, and again, it's mostly things like Burnout and Buzzer and other members of the Dreadnoks, which are cool and interesting. And then when we get through all the different Dreadnoks, they do have Zorana, Xandar, and Zartan in there. And then they have a bunch of Dreadnought vehicles, things like the Air Skiff, the Chameleon Swamp Skier, the Doom Cycle, the Dreadnought Cycle. They have their own little cycle, which is actually both of these are trikes. They're not actually bicycles. And then, a bunch of other really cool, interesting vehicles. And then this is where they start introducing some new vehicle options. Things like there's a new vehicle trait called Ramshackle. There's new vehicle combat options, which include boarding and playing chicken, which I think is interesting. Then some new Dreadnought equipment options, which are specifically, they have a weapon trait called Border, which makes it easier for you to use the new boarding rules that they introduce in here, which is cool. And then just some Dreadnought general perks, which again are going to be somewhat vehicle focused, and then the other ones are going to be a little bit more kind of being aggressive focused. And then this section on Dreadnoks in your campaign, which again, useful if you want to play a Dreadnought character. Yeah, moving on. Chapter 4, The Oktober Guard. The Oktober Guard is, I mean, I'll read their little description here because it's, my understanding, the Oktober Guard started as these are the bad Russians when they were first introduced forever ago. Now, because Russia isn't the USSR, it's changed into something different. So this is how they describe them. Composed of soldiers of various nationalities, the Oktober Guard officially acted in the interests of Warsaw Pact signees and then later collective security treaty signees. Their focus on global threats both put them at odds with G.I. Joe and made them valuable allies in the fight against Cobra. So again, they're not 100% anti-Joe. They're not 100% pro-Joe. They describe it here as a counter to NATO, which NATO's been in the news recently, and that's its whole other thing. So again, it's an interesting group that has kind of been retconned a few times as global politics changes constantly, especially in Eastern Europe. So yeah, as far as what they are from a mechanical standpoint, they have their own faction, which actually gives you a different faction perk depending on your role. So things like for the commando, the faction perk, the overall perk, I believe, is Bogatyr. Bogatyr sounds about right. Nu Pagodi is their other faction perk. I don't speak Russian, but I can pronounce some of it because I learned to sing in it back in college. So for the commando, you get the hacking algorithms faction perk, which is basically you can burn a story point before a technology skill test related to computers to get an edge on the skill test. And there is a different faction perk for every single role. So that in and of itself is really interesting. And again, from a templating standpoint, the idea that if you're going to create a faction, the faction is going to effectively give different training to different roles and therefore give them a different perk is interesting and cool. And then they have a new origin, the Collective Security Treaty Organization personnel, which again is its own thing. And then the new focus is the Engineer Troop, which for the most part is a vehicle-based character. Like a lot of the perks that they get allow you to do really cool stuff with your vehicles and keep them working really well. In addition to that, they also get like one or two perks that allow you to upgrade just weapons in general, but they are very much more vehicle focused. For doing something like using the, what's it called again? The Quartermaster's Guide to Gear introduced a bunch of new rules for vehicles and personal vehicles specifically. The Engineer Troop works really, really well in a group that either has a couple personal vehicles or uses a lot of vehicles in general. Like that's what they're built around. They do introduce a new location, the Ice Wall, which is in Siberia. Of course it is. And then they just introduce a bunch of new Oktober Guard contacts. To be blunt, the Oktober Guard, to me personally, is probably the least interesting group in here because, and this is something we'll talk about when we get to Chapter 5, making books like this where you kind of fictionalize a real group of people, or in this particular case, it's actually not fictionalizing a real group of people, but the original inspiration for this was a real group of people, and now they've done everything they can to kind of chop it off from that so that they're not using harmful stereotypes and things like that. So because of that, the Oktober Guard is kind of weird because it has a very obvious inspiration from the USSR, which hasn't existed in over 30 years. But it's blatantly obvious that this is inspired by the USSR and kind of the stereotypes of Russia back then and Eastern Europe back then, but they don't want to feed into that, and so everything here they change it just enough so they're not using harmful stereotypes, and it kind of just turns it into something that's weird. And I don't think it has anywhere near as much of a kind of identity as the Dreadnoks and the Arashikage. Like, those both have really, really strong identities for those groups. This one just feels a little bit more wishy-washy, in my humble opinion. Again, I don't think that is the Essence 20 people's fault. I think introducing the Oktober Guard to a modern audience was not going to go well in any way, shape, or form, and this is probably the best way that they could have done it. It's just when you compare it to both the Dreadnoks and the Arashikage, it just feels like the weakest group in here. Despite the fact that there's more stuff in here than in the Dreadnok chapter, the Dreadnoks really have a theme and they really have an identity that the Oktober Guard just doesn't feel like as much, in my humble opinion. So yeah, we have a couple of Oktober Guard contacts, which are Big Bear and Red Star. And then you have a bunch of threats. You have your generic, I'm going to try pronouncing some more Russian or something in a Cyrillic alphabet. Oktober Guard Kursant, and then Oktober Guard Lieutenant, which I think is just Lieutenant, and I might be mispronouncing that wrong, or I might be mispronouncing that. But it's spelled Lieutenant. But to be perfectly honest, Lieutenant is spelled Latelin, so who knows how the hell you pronounce the damn word. And then the final kind of generic one is Oktober Guard Inserner, which is an interesting word. And then we start getting things like Colonel Brekov, Dana, I think is the name, Diana, something like that. So again, more kind of specific Oktober Guard members from the comics and stuff like that. All of them interesting stat blocks. Again, it's hard to find a boring Essence 20 stat block. I do love that Shrage, part of his, like, every one of these threats has a little description. His description has redactions in it. Like, I'm just going to read the first few lines of it. Shrage, originating from redacted, and it doesn't say redacted, it's just, you can see there's a word under there, and it's covered in black ink, which is how they actually redact information, is they just pour black ink on it, so it's completely incapable of being viewed. So you have originating from redacted, Shrage, file name redacted, initially enlisted in the redacted before his temporary reassignment to the Oktober Guard. He's a man of few words, something that Colonel Brekov and the other members find unsettling. Even between missions, he's seldom found outside his quarters. According to what records do exist, his redacted is due to redacted training alongside military units from redacted, redacted, and redacted, and it goes on from there. I just love the fact that this character is so secretive that the GM is not allowed to know what they do. For me, that's a unique little flavor thing that I think is just amazing and wonderful. And then eventually we get to the Oktober Guard vehicles, which again, all of these look like toys that I remember not buying, but wanting to buy when I was a child. Like the Dracon Attack helicopter. I mean, you could look at things that look like LEDs that light up. And like, it's one of my favorite things about the G.I. Joe RPG in general, is it is a toy commercial for toys that don't exist. And I find that hilarious and heartwarming at the same time. It just blows my mind that, yep, G.I. Joe was always a toy commercial, and it is still a toy commercial, and these toys don't even exist. You can't buy these toys, but they're still toy commercials. And they are very, very cool. The vehicles themselves are very, very interesting and fun. And then they add some new weapon traits. They add some new weapon and battle dress options. One of my personal favorite ones, the Combat Exoskeleton, which is the battle dress upgrade. Which basically, it's exactly what it sounds like. You have an exoskeleton that increases your like brawn and might and stuff like that. Or one of the new weapons, crowd dispersal energy cannon. And the description: this non-lethal weapon discharges powerful light, sound, or heat energy that can confound those within the area of its blast. They're mounted on vehicles due to their size and power requirements. You have crowd control, literal crowd control, which I find absolutely amazing. So yeah, and then they have a bunch of new Oktober Guard general perks, and then a tiny little section on the Oktober Guard in your campaign. And they actually separate this one into Oktober Guard and the GI Joe, and then the Oktober Guard and the Cobra campaign, and then the Oktober Guard in an Oktober Guard campaign. So yeah, moving on. Chapter 5. A World of Adventure. This is the everything else chapter. And the first thing it starts off is a new origin, Interpol. For anyone unaware, Interpol stands for the International Criminal Police Organization. And it is, I'm actually not sure exactly where Interpol gets its authority. I don't think, because the UN have their own policing force. Basically, it's an international police organization that's designed specifically to deal with international crime. Something that I think a lot of people might not understand. The reason, like in the United States, the reason that we have federal agencies like the FBI and the things like that is crimes that happen in between states, because each state have their own sets of laws, and some things that are legal in one state might be illegal in another, or the sentences for crimes in different states are different. In order to be able to prosecute like interstate crime, you need a group that technically doesn't specifically follow any one state's laws. They are, nationwide. They are federal. That's where we have these federal policing agencies. That's effectively what Interpol is for, is the idea that much more so than different states, different countries have different laws and different rules for how to prove guilt and what you can be arrested for, how you can be arrested. And so Interpol is specifically designed around this idea of when people are committing international crimes, they can't really be charged by one country or another unless both of those countries decide to work together 100% to do this. And so that's where Interpol kind of comes from. Again, I have no idea where Interpol actually gets its authority, if it's just like a collective agreement, kind of like the United Nations, where like, yeah, we'll let the United Nations do things, or if it is under a branch of some government somewhere, I don't know, but it is a thing that really exists, and now you can be an Interpol agent. And then after talking about Interpol, we get into the new factions. So the free, or not three, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 new generic factions that they introduce in this chapter. They are Criminal Organization, Freedom Fighters, International Syndicate, and Mercenaries. And what you have here is basically a guide on this is how you can create your own factions, and they will fit under one of these kind of blanket terms. Like if you want to create a criminal organization that interacts with Cobra and possibly G.I. Joe, I mean, how many times did the Black Cat work with Spider-Man, despite the fact that Spider-Man fights crime and the Black Cat commits crime? Same thing is true about Catwoman and Batman. Every so often, in certain situations, you might be working with some less than good people. And with an organization like G.I. Joe, it might not be the worst idea to have a member of a criminal faction that just kind of hangs around the base and can become useful, but every so often has to be excluded from certain things so as not to kind of show that the GI Joes are actively working with a criminal organization. So you have criminal organizations, you have freedom fighters, which are basically just any group that's, well, here, I'll read the description. Freedom fighters are a new generic faction for characters fighting against Cobra. So this is your kind of generic good guy faction. Criminal organization is a new generic faction for characters fighting against G.I. Joe. And then International Syndicate is a new generic faction for characters fighting against G.I. Joe. So this is something where, like, again, a criminal organization is small fries. An international syndicate is exactly what it sounds like. It's a criminal organization that's gone global. And so they have different things and rules for creating them. And then a mercenary group is exactly that. They say mercenary is a new generic faction for characters on either side of the fight between G.I. Joe. And this is, especially for mercenary specifically, this is another thing that you can use to create that inter-party conflict. If the G.I. Joes enlist a mercenary group for a few missions, and so that's where your character joins the G.I. Joe campaign, well, eventually the mercenary group might get hired by somebody else that's working against Joe, and your character has to decide, do I want to be loyal to the Joes? Do I want to be loyal to my mercenary group? Or do I want to effectively just sit this out effectively and not do something that helps either faction so I can remain technically loyal to both? Where even if I'm on the mission, there'll be points where it goes, hey, sorry guys, I can't do this specific part of the mission because I'd be fighting against my own people. So have fun. I will go do something else. I will be a different part of this, this mission, but I can't actually do these things. Y'all have to do that on your own. Which is an even crazier thing to try and balance. So again, these give you really nice kind of templates that you can use to create your own factions. They are they're not completely generic in the idea that they just let you create whatever you want. Like for criminal organization, the faction perks, they do have specific things like you're trained with assault rifles and get a free silencer upgrade for your pistol. So very specific faction perk. But they do, they are significantly more generic, so you can kind of customize them as you want. And again, if you understand templating, they give you really good advice on how each one of these organizations works, so you can kind of create your own. So yeah, it's not, I guess it's not entirely like Finster's Monstermatic where it teaches you absolutely everything, but there's enough stuff here that you very easily, using these 4 different faction options, you very easily can create any of your own factions for any Essence 20 game. It's just not quite laid out as well as Finster's Monstermatic. It's still very, very useful. The next section, they talk about G.I. Joe campaigns on a global scale. And then Arashikage campaigns on global scale, Oktober Guard campaigns on a global scale, then Intercontinental Adventures. And this is another thing that I want to emphasize. I don't think they did anything wrong here. It just annoys me that this has to be in the book. Not only because of people that take things way, way too seriously in TTRPGs, but also the history of TTRPGs and them doing some very, very racist and really, really insulting things throughout the history of TTRPGs when they have tried to introduce a culture that they're not familiar with, and they just use really offensive stereotypes and things like that. So the first section basically has this entire guide of, hey, these are the things that you don't want to do because in TTRPGs, they have been done before, and it made people hate the creators. So Like, good example. Present people as regular people. People aren't magical, in tune with nature, or fundamentally different because of their ethnicity. You shouldn't have to say that. Like, G.I. Joe is the least, like, magical version of the Essence to 20 system. It is the one that is rooted the most in real life. Like, there isn't a magical, mystical morphing grid that gives you access to these cool powers. You're not this super cool robot that has access to this technology that doesn't exist. It can do amazing things. You are just regular people. And yet they still have to kind of clarify, by the way, we don't need to be using the harmful stereotypes of the natives are magical and in tune with nature, and that's what makes them important, not that they're human beings. Another bit of advice that they give here: feature local characters who are protagonists, not just victims or villains. Center these characters in their own stories and lives instead of casting them as supporting characters or adversaries for outsiders to save. Again, I hate that this is a part of the book. I think it's really stupid. But it's necessary. And that's the thing that upsets me the most, because I have seen people do stuff like this. And from a storytelling perspective, in a TTRPG, the player characters are the heroes of their story. And so the idea of the damsel in distress is a really, really common story trope, because it is a fun story to tell. It's fun to feel like you are saving people that need to be saving. That feeling of being a hero and having people rely on you to save them feels really good. So I don't inherently think like damsel in distress or just stories where you are going to save people is a bad thing. But they're not the only stories that exist. And if the entirety of your campaign exclusively requires you to be the only people that are ever the heroes, the story itself gets very, very boring. It gets very, very formulaic, and your players are not going to interact with your NPCs as much, because they're all going to see them as just, oh, this is my new MacGuffin. So having, especially with things like the contact system in Essence 20, having NPCs that you meet are not there going, oh, thank God you're here, superhero man. We need your help. Having them be just as qualified as your Joes, first of all, in the world of G.I. Joe, makes sense. And second of all, yes, the G.I. Joes are called on to come in and save people, but the Joes also have their own goals and their own things that they need to do. And every so often, they need to ask for help. And so if they're going into another country, they may go into another country specifically going, hey, we need your guys' help because this is what we want to do here, and we can't do that here for this reason or this reason or this reason. And again, I know a lot of GMs get really worried about the idea of the quote-unquote DMPC, where or GMPC, where basically you create this NPC that is basically a player character, but because they're run by the game master, they are more powerful than everybody, and they become the hero of the story instead of the player characters. And so a lot of people will overcorrect and make all of the NPCs, subservient to the heroes. The heroes always have to be the most important characters of the story, and they don't. And so that's what that advice is really kind of talking about. It's not, oh, create DMPCs and make sure that the players understand that they're not the most important people in the world. No, they technically are. This is their story. But just because it's their story does not mean it can't interact with other people's stories, where they are the heroes, and a group of heroes can work together. So yeah, I really, really hate that this is a thing that is in this book. But it's a thing that needs to be in this book, and that annoys me. And then they basically go through every single continent. Like the first continent they talk about, probably because it starts with the letter A, and then the second letter is F, so alphabetically it comes first, is Africa. And so they give some ideas, like I'm just going to give an example for they have a section called People. Here are some ideas for characters from different nations in this area. So for Madagascar, a horticulturalist who cares for Madagascar's avenue of baobabs. They protect the ancient trees from vandals who carve their names into the trunks, as well as the wildlife and bushfires, which are constantly increasingly common due to global climate change. So they create a character that is not there to go, oh, G.I. Joes, please help me. They're a very qualified person who has a very particular thing that they do. And if you're going into Madagascar, they actually give you a couple different reasons why you might interact with this person. First of all, they might be someone that needs your help. It's not to say that you can't have the Joes being called on to help. And maybe what they're asking for is to help you fight the fires or the things like that. At the same time, the Joes may be coming to Madagascar because Cobra has set up a secret base there for doing something. I don't know a ton about Madagascar, so I don't know why Cobra would be there, but there's lots of reasons to go to Madagascar other than tourism, and there's probably a reason Cobra would be there. You might specifically talk to this person because one of the things that you have to worry about, because Cobra doesn't care about the people there, is they may start wildfires. And so having an expert who their entire job is to protect these trees and also be able to fight wildfires would be an incredibly valuable ally. Or going there, the G.I. Joes need to go in there and they don't want to piss off the local government. So they need to work with this horticulturist, because if they're there and they're in a firefight and they actually damage these trees, which I'm assuming the baobabs, I think those are trees. Again, I don't know Madagascar very well. So just by giving you this brief description of a character with a lot of different reasons to exist and a lot of different expertises, you can have 3 or 4 different little plot hooks just from that character that can give you a wide range of different stories, from, hey, we're coming here to help out the Madagascarian government and this is the person that's our contact, all the way down to, we're here to stop Cobra and we literally can't do it ourselves because we're not from Madagascar. We don't know how to deal with the various things here, and this particular person is an expert in fighting wildfires, which I will guarantee you, if Cobra is there, they will start one simply because they know G.I. Joe will try to stop it instead of chasing after them. It's a really common bad guy tactic. So stuff like that I really, really love. Then they have a section called Resources and Terrain. Basically just talks about kind of the stuff that's there. And then they give plot seeds. And these are very specific plot seeds that give you a good reason to be in Africa. So I'll read one of them to you. Roadblock's been unusually nervous and cooking up a storm, and he's drafting every Joe he can get his kitchen gloves on to aid his anxious culinary efforts. The reason for this fretfulness? A televised Jollof competition held in Ghana and Nigeria invited Roadblock to serve as a celebrity judge. These two nations' Jollof rivalry is infamous. I'm assuming Jollof is a type of food. Probably native to Ghana and Nigeria. And Roadblock is worried about inadvertently causing a diplomatic faux pas. What he really should be worried about is overkill. The Cobra agent's cybernetics have dulled his taste buds, so he can only taste flavorful food. Overkill is personally leading a BAT team to gatecrash this competition to kidnap the world's best Jollof chefs and force them to be an elite new corps of kitchen vipers. And if that sounds like nonsense, welcome to G.I. Joe. Like, the comics were much more serious, but that sounds like a plot from the cartoon series. Like 100%, we have to stop Cobra from stealing a chef to start a new kitchen vipers. Okay. So yeah, each one of the different places is going to have these very specific plot seeds and then some people. The Americas, which I find it interesting that they group both North and South America into just the Americas. I understand it's probably because the U.S. is basically half of North America is the U.S. and the other half is Canada. So, I mean, I guess I'm never quite sure, like Central America, if it's its own continent or if it's part of North America or not. But because the TTRPG market is biggest in the U.S., we already know a lot about the U.S. and how it works, and we have many opinions about how to run games in the U.S. So you don't really need stuff like that. But for the people, they do have examples from Barbados, Bolivia, Canada, Mexico, and they do have a USA KK character. And then the plot seeds, again, stuff that you would expect. And then we go to Antarctica and the Arctic, which again is another thing that I think are... It's another section that a lot of people kind of forget. Oh yeah, Antarctica is a continent. And there are people that live there, I think year-round. There's scientific bases and stuff like there that operate year-round or almost year-round, because the winters down there are dangerous. So that can make for a very, very interesting campaign place. And I gotta read this plot seed because, again, G.I. Joe. Satellite Images detects Cobra has established a base at the North Pole and threatens the world with a new weather dominator. Only G.I. Joe can defeat these forces without drawing the world into conflict. Admiral Keelhaul and Snow Job lead the Joes against aggressive Cobra forces led by Cobra Commander and Destro. Because of course. I love it. So yeah, and so Antarctica and the Arctic is basically both. Antarctica is at the bottom, and then the Arctic is at the top. So, yeah. And then we have Asia, which includes, like, a lot of people, when they say Asia, they think, oh yeah, they think mostly like Eastern Asia, which is Japan, China, Korea, stuff like that. But they also have, like, the UAE, the United Arab Emirate, I think is what it is. And then also Laos, which is Southeast Asia. So that in and of itself is kind of cool. And then plot seeds. And then Europe, which most Americans are kind of familiar with Europe, but not really. Like, we know Europe exists, and, you know, we're familiar with, like, Italian food and French food, and you know, British people sound either funny or sexy. But this gives us a little bit better idea with that. And then Oceania, which is basically South Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Hawaii, stuff like that, Samoa. So technically, Australia is the continent. Oceania is technically a region that includes Southeast Asia as well as all those different islands and archipelagos and stuff like that. So, yeah, more interesting, cool stuff there. And then we get to international and global threats, which, again, is mostly like Backstop. Born in Montreal, but growing up in Detroit. So he's the Canadian-American. Big Ben. Guess where he's from? Dice. He has a buddy named Slice, which annoys me that they do it alphabetically. So Slice is significantly further in here than Dice is, but they're designed to be used as a pair. And I would have much rather have them put them next to each other in the book to make it easier to run them, because they actually have abilities in their stat blocks that refer to the other Kika character. So, yeah, and these are just international Joes. So, yeah, more stuff. Skymates, who's an Aussie. Snowstorm, where's he from? Marta Abreu, University of Las Villas. I have no idea. I don't recognize... Every one of these characters, they have a flag behind them. I do not recognize the flag behind Snowstorm. So anyone that knows where Snowstorm is from, the flag is blue and white stripes with a red triangle on the left-hand side and a white star inside of it. I don't recognize that flag, but I know it's a flag. So, and then Vipra and Wolf Spider. Yeah, so stuff like that. And then, yeah, that's it. Moving on. 2 final thoughts. Overall, I really like this book. There's a lot here, specifically, like I said, for GM specifically, the generic factions are probably the closest we're going to get to a complete guide of this is how you make your own factions. And while it's not quite as elaborate as Finster's Monstermatic, it's still an absolutely wonderful tool for GMs if you want to start experimenting with factions. And they don't have to be exclusively for G.I. Joe. If you wanted to create a new faction for the Power Rangers, you could use kind of the guidelines here, plus the stuff built into the Power Rangers, to create maybe a rival Power Rangers faction, or something like that. Like there's enough factions in here in the first Factions in Action book that if you understand templating, you can create some pretty interesting stuff. Especially when you look at something like the Arashikage versus Ninja Force versus the Red Ninjas. All three of those factions are basically the same theme. They're ninjas, but they operate in very different ways. And so by looking at those three things, if you wanted to create a rival Power Rangers faction like the Thunder Rangers in Ninja Storm, or if you wanted to create a rival Autobots faction where you have the Autobots and then you have like an adjacent group where they're not Decepticons, but they're not 100% aligned with Optimus Prime's version of how Autobots are supposed to act. You theoretically could use that as a template to do that. And then an additional stuff, like there's just tons of new stuff in here. The new weapons upgrades and weapons features, the new battle dress upgrades, all the new weapons, the new perks and things like that. Like there's a lot in here to enjoy, and I really, really like that. For a little while, when we were starting to get like the first Factions in Action and stuff like that, I was starting to get worried that the Essence 20 system was just starting to get this really massive rules bloat where it's going to become too confusing. And for the most part, that really didn't become a thing. As much as now G.I. Joe has like 47 bajillion different factions, the faction system in and of itself is not overly complicated. Yes, there's a lot of different factions now, which can feel complicated, but other than when a character is changing factions or when they create their character from the beginning and choose their faction, it's not really going to be something that you're dealing with every single game session. So as much as it could have created a lot of complexity, now that I've seen it used over and over and over again, it's just one of the aspects of the Essence 20 system that G.I. Joe tends to explore more than any other group. And that's the other thing that I really like about G.I. Joe in general is, again, for Power Rangers, your perks and your roles are going to be the things that are explored the most in Power Rangers. So if you really want to get a good understanding of how the role system works, Power Rangers is the best thing to study it from. Transformers, on the other hand, their origins are really important, as are their focuses. Like, they really do have some pretty interesting focuses, or foci, however you want to pronounce it, the plural. G.I. Joe basically gets to focus on the stuff that both of those groups don't deal with as much. Equipment is really not a big thing for Power Rangers. You have your power weapons, you have your sidearms, and then you have your suit that doesn't really change. Your perks are going to change you significantly more for Power Rangers. So perks and roles are the things there. So G.I. Joes, they have so many different equipment options and battle dress options that they get to really play around with that. Factions, again, are not a big thing for either of those two other ones. So they go hard into the factions. And then vehicles are not really a thing that gets explored a lot in either of those two things. Yes, Transformers can use vehicles, but there also are vehicles. And then Power Rangers, their vehicles are Zords. But the G.I. Joes, they have all these different vehicles that they can have. And they might have a personal vehicle they use all the time, or every single mission they might be using a different vehicle. And so the more I kind of learn about and I focus on G.I. Joe, the more I realize that G.I. Joe is basically, I don't want to say the dumping ground, but this is where the designers get to play with all the other aspects of the Essence 20 system that they don't really get to play with that much in Power Rangers or Transformers. And that in and of itself is really, really cool. So, anyway, that is going to be all for me today. As always, reminder, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below, interested to hear from you guys. First of all, do you have an opinion on any of these factions? The various versions of ninjas, the biker gang, or the not USSR? Let me know those in the comments down below. And then, if you would like, what kind of faction would you want to create? Do you want to do a criminal organization, an international syndicate, a freedom fighter group, or a set of mercenaries? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.